Chairman, I want to begin by thanking both our distinguished members for being here. Particularly want to thank the chairman, who I think has been exceptionally articulate and astute in the discussion that we've had. And I also want to posit a couple of things up front before I ask my questions. First, I don't question anybody's motives in this debate. I really don't. Quite frankly, on the president's side, look, about 2 out of every 3 people of opinion in the country are against this deal. Most Americans think, according to the latest poll, I actually saw another one just today, that if a majority of Congress disapproves, as it likely will, that the president shouldn't veto that. You know, from the president's standpoint, the future Democratic leader in the Senate is opposed to this deal. The former Democratic chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee is opposed to this deal. I believe both the current ranking members of the Senate and the House Foreign Affairs Committee, both Democrats obviously, are opposed to this deal. So if you're willing to push ahead under that, then you certainly must believe in the deal. So I don't have any doubt the president believes in what he's doing. I don't have any doubt the secretary believes in what they're doing. I also want to posit the same thing's true on the other side. You know, we've heard a lot of rhetoric out of the White House that Republican opposition is simply partisan obstructionist. You know, they were singing a little different tune 6 weeks ago, or when Trade Promotion Authority got passed overwhelmingly by Republican votes to give the president what to that point had been his biggest foreign policy victory of the year. And frankly, if he negotiates successfully deals in the Trans-Pacific Partnership and the equivalent agreement with our European friends, it'll probably be overwhelmingly Republican votes that pass that if he chooses to submit an agreement. So to suggest that Republicans aren't willing to support the president simply because there's a partisan difference isn't wrong. I think actually they've demonstrated that they will, or isn't correct. They've demonstrated repeatedly that they're willing to support him if they think he's right, you know, which I assume is true for our Democratic members who opposed him on the trade issue because they thought he was wrong. I don't doubt their motives, but they didn't support, quote, the president for partisan reasons. I would hope they'd grant we're not opposing him today for partisan reasons. There are a lot of things about this agreement that cause me a great deal of concern. Mr. Chairman, I want to address my first question to you. There have been all sorts of news reports about secret side deals between Iran and the International Atomic Energy Agency. Have those agreements been fully disclosed to the committee or to the country? Does the administration even have detailed knowledge about those agreements?
I have asked for those agreements in writing, the 2-side agreements, and no, we have not received them. Mr. Cole.
In your opinion, could those agreements materially impact whether or not this is a good agreement or not?
If we go to the issue of self-inspections, I had always presumed that international inspectors would be doing the international inspections. And given the erosion of the original concept of anywhere, anytime inspections to first 24 hours and then, as Michael Hayden, former head of the CIA, explained, into a position where it becomes a political decision, not a technical one, in which Iran has a say, Russia has a say, China has a say in terms of access. I think a debate about that mechanism for verification is one that could have an impact upon members' decisions about whether or not this will be effective in preventing Iran from obtaining a weapon.
Is there any reason to believe that the International Atomic Energy Agency or the Iranian government would make these agreements public so we would all know what the nature of the inspection regime is, you know, who can come, who can't come, under what conditions?
And this is why I wrote to the White House asking that they be made public, and I don't see any reason why they shouldn't be, so that they can be part of this debate.
Do you know if the administration has asked the International Atomic Energy Agency and the Iranian government to make them public?
I do not know the answer to that.
I would certainly hope that they would, and if they haven't to this point, that they do. Let me move to another part of the agreement that we know a little bit more about, and that's the easing of sanctions in terms of the financial windfall that will come to the Iranian regime. As I understood it, when we initially announced, and the President initially announced our objectives in the negotiations, things were supposed to be linked so that as confidence was accumulated that the Iranians were keeping their word, sanctions would be gradually eased. There would be a sort of process of quid pro quo as that unfolded. Is that indeed the nature of the agreement today?
I think one of the things we ran into is the attitude of the military in Iran, which early on boasted that they're not going to give access to their military sites for inspection, that they're not going to have that in their dreams, to quote the IRGC leadership. So what evolved was a situation where, because we weren't going to achieve the original goals that we sought, in terms of, because it evolved into manage access and then this question of side agreements, Iran just held its position and said, no, we want all the sanctions lifted. And the very real question is, how then do you verify that Iran is keeping its side of the agreement? As Michael Hayden said, the worry we always had was not just the facility we might want to look at, but all the facilities where they might be doing additional work that we couldn't gain access to. So we end up with self-inspections on the Iranian side of the equation, and we end up giving ground in terms of lifting the sanctions without having that verification. So I think it goes right to the conundrum that you point out, Mr. Cole.
Well, let me just, and you alluded to this, but can you give us some idea of what the people in the region, the affected friends and allies of the United States, what's their reaction been?
I received a call from the ambassador from the UAE who indicated that their government was no longer felt bound by the agreement, which we call the gold standard on nonproliferation, which the UAE had signed. And he indicated to us that, in his words, your worst enemy has achieved this right to enrich. It's a right to enrich now that your friends are going to want to, and we won't be the only country. So I have heard a critique of this on an ongoing basis. Myself and my ranking member have had lunch with the representative of Saudi Arabia. We've heard from the leadership of all 5 political parties, main parties in Israel, from Labor, from center-left, from center-right. We've heard from the governments in Lebanon about their concern. Well, let me just frankly say that as this process went along, we heard concerns from those in the region who feel that Iran might become the hegemon in that region, especially with the lifting of sanctions. We heard their worries about the negotiation.
So that would suggest that this could easily ignite a arms race of sorts in the Middle East between our friends who feel somewhat abandoned or at least vulnerable.
And we've had much testimony, Mr. Cole, before the committee about those who are concerned that we had a non-proliferation regime to which now Iran has carved out an exception. And what then will be the reaction? We already know the reaction from the United Arab Emirates, from that conversation the ambassador had with me, but who else will follow down that road? And that is why it's very important when you have a negotiation to remember that the end goal here is to have something which really could control the right to enrich and also the verification.
You know, one of the things that concerns me about this, and I'll try to be quick because I know my colleagues have many questions too, we hear a lot of comparisons between the Reagan negotiation with the old Soviet Union and this one. And it strikes me that the key difference was at Reykjavik, Ronald Reagan got up and walked out. He said the deal isn't good enough. And lo and behold, we had a deal later that was good enough. Unfortunately, I think that critical moment was probably in April of this last year when the deadline for the negotiation was up. And I think had the president said, everybody's negotiated in good faith, we just can't agree, we're leaving, but the sanctions, of course, stay. If you want to change your mind and give us a call, we'll be happy to come back at the table and sit right back with you and see if we can find a way forward. I think that was really a critical error. I think most negotiations I've seen, if you're extending the deadline, you're the guy making the concessions.
And Mr. Cole, I think that was a fundamental error in judgment, because instead, by lifting, at a time when Iran was on the ropes, by lifting sanctions by $700 million a month, that gave Iran the breathing room then and the confidence to believe that if they waited this out, maybe they did not need to give concessions. And it was not just on that front, but also the transfer of, the gold sales from Turkey. There were areas where Iran was beginning to test to see what would we do to prevent Iran from busting sanctions. And in a situation like that, if you don't do what Reagan did, show your resolve, as he showed his resolve in walking away from Reykjavik until he got a better deal. If instead you give in and you start to lift the sanctions and you say, okay, you've got the right to enrich in the meantime, a fair deal would have been to say, okay, you shut down your enrichment and we'll give you something in return. But ultimately, out of that unfortunate situation, we lost the pressure for the right to enrich. But it wasn't just that we lost in the negotiation, because as we went forward, we got rolled on every one of those 4 issues that I raised, and then, amazingly, at the 11th hour, Russia came to Iran's side in this debate and said, by the way, we also want the arms embargo itself lifted on ICBM technology as well as regular conventional arms, and they got that in the negotiation.
Are you aware, and this would be speculative, and you might not be able to answer definitively, but I appreciate your opinion on it because it's well informed. Were there any gains from April till we signed the deal in July? Did the deal somehow get better for us? I can certainly see a number of ways it got better along the way for the Iranians, because it's very different from the objectives that the president announced at the beginning of the negotiation. But are there areas that we seem to get the upper hand in? Any?
Mr. Cole, I did not see areas where I felt we were gaining ground. And this goes to the issue that I and Mr. Engel and my committee brought up in the prior Congress when we suggested that if we had additional leverage on Iran, if we had passed that legislation which would have cut Iran's access, to its financial sector, and actually give the Ayatollah that tough choice between real compromise on his nuclear program or economic collapse, that was the leverage we needed at a time when Iran was fighting a real financial problem with hyperinflation, very high unemployment, the price of oil going down. That was the time to leverage. But the administration did not want to put that additional leverage on, and despite a bipartisan vote of 400 to 20 in the House, they blocked that legislation in the Senate. So I think we lost our opportunity to leverage for what we needed in the agreement.
Well, I'm going to yield back
Mr.
time,
Cole, sir, before you yield back, would you yield to me for a second?
My friend, I'd be happy.
Because I think I've got the answer to one of your questions.
Yes, ma'am.
My intrepid staff back here is giving this to me about the question about the side agreements with IAEA. There is no secret side deal hiding loopholes to the nuclear agreement with Iran. Iran has the same sort of agreements with IAEA that the United States has. Iran is a party to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, so it has so-called, in quote, safeguards agreement with the IAEA that contains, among other things, verification protocols agreed to by IAEA and Iran. The IAEA has these safeguard agreements with 180 countries, including us. We have one of our own. Each one of them are separate. These extremely sensitive agreements, including the USA's agreement with IAEA, are all confidential because if they were public, none of the 180 countries would agree to IAEA oversight.
Well,
If lawmakers from Iran ask the IAEA to see the safeguards agreement with the United States, the IAEA Director General, Yikia, I hope that's right, Amano, would say no, and he did the same when he told our lawmakers that he could not show them Iran's agreement.
reclaiming my time,
Well, thank you for yielding.
Absolutely. I just would point out, there's a big difference between the United States, which hasn't violated the non-proliferation agreement, and Iran that has repeatedly violated it. That's why there was a negotiation, because they had been in violation repeatedly on this. So the idea that they should have the same treatment as people that have kept their word and kept the agreement, I think, is suspect to me. And regardless, at the end of the day, I think it has to be made available because this is all about a country that has repeatedly broken its word and not kept its commitment. So that would suggest you need to have a little extra assurance on our side.
But again, this is an international agreement with the IAEA, and the 180 countries have all signed on.
If my friends...
They have us unilaterally.
Gentleman from Oklahoma controls
I
the
didn't say unilaterally. I said, I think the Iranian government, frankly, ought to disclose it. I think the IAEA, in this case, is a little bit different because this is a country that has broken its agreement. So we're saying it should have all the privileges under this that everybody has that keeps their word. And I'm sorry, I just don't have that kind of confidence in the people in Tehran and the regime in Tehran. So that's my concern. Let me yield back, if I may, but I just want to thank my friend, the chairman, and I want to thank your ranking member as well for the manner in which you both have conducted yourself through this and the hearings. It's been informative. It's been helpful to those of us that are not on your committee. And again, look forward to hearing more in the days ahead. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.